Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Earthly Headlines. Today we're going to talk about some American history and more specifically shipwrecks in the Great Lakes area. Now the Great Lakes area is really important because well, for a lot of reasons. Economically, number one, it was a good way to get things across, transport things from city to city. There were a lot of great cities built around Lake Erie: Cleveland, Chicago, Detroit, Buffalo, and so on, Toledo, and so on. This particular story revolves around all the shipwrecks that they find. There are tons and tons of shipwrecks in the Great Lakes area, and contrary to popular knowledge, it's actually really treacherous to haul really heavy cargo to and from across the lakes, to and from cities across the lakes. There's one particular shipwreck that was pretty legendary called the Lake Serpent. The Lake Serpent dates back to the early 1800s, and the brothers, they were running their own company, and they were quarrying limestone from an island called Kelly Island. And on the map, you can see it on this map right here, it's this island right here. And they're going back and forth from Cleveland to this island, taking this limestone. They sunk. Apparently, they never came back. Their bodies washed ashore, but their boat full of cargo just was never found, and it became legend after some time passed. And this article that came out talks about this shipwreck among other shipwrecks. But one thing that attracted me to this was these groups that are dedicated, like these archaeology teams that are put together, like they're private companies. It's like a movie. They go out and then they're hired by whoever, and then they deep dive. They do all the dirty work to get this stuff out. It's really cool. It reminds me of James Cameron. I think he does this kind of stuff. I think he hires guys, but he gets in there too. And he has firsthand experience in diving and learning about, specifically in marine biology. I don't think he's ever gone into like the pyramids or anything like that. But anyway, he's a good example of somebody in the private sector who gets out there and experiences like this Indiana Jones style, Jacques Cousteau style of exploration. This picture right here is the bow of the ship, and it's the snake carving on the Lake Serpent, so you can't really tell. It looks like just a regular rock to me, but apparently this is what's believed to be the shipwreck, which they finally found. So here's a brief description. It's an 8-year-old 47-foot schooner left in Cleveland September 1829 for the 55-mile trip to the Lake Erie Islands. So again, these are the Lake Erie Islands, and then this one specifically is Kelly's Island. So this is the one that the Lake Serpent was going to. The island's rich with limestone. The ship's crew collected a load of stone to return to Cleveland, but the ship never made it back. The bodies of Captain Ezra Wright and his brother Robert Wright washed ashore in Lorain County, just west of Cleveland, and then it was lost forever at the bottom of the lake. So now the National Museum of the Great Lakes, which is in Toledo, they announced that the Serpent may have been found and is believed to be the oldest known shipwreck in Lake Erie. 1829, I guess, compared to other things, is not that ancient, but in the scope of American and Canadian history, it's pretty old. I mean, this is the early days right after. This is like maybe 40 years or less than 40 years after George Washington. So this is the real deal stuff here. There's probably a lot that can be learned from this. And I mean, they've found other ships as well in Lake Erie, which is not that. The thing about Lake Erie is it's not very deep, which is why it's so dangerous. Some shallow water can really mess up, like combined with wind and storms. It's really difficult to have a seagoing vessel back then that could withstand that kind of punishment. So the Great Lakes, just some background information. The Great Lakes was really important in the War of 1812. That's how these cities came to be. Actually, they started out as outposts where they were just transporting supplies and whatnot, and then it grew into cities. Like I said earlier, Detroit, Chicago, Buffalo, Milwaukee, Toledo, Cleveland, etc. And then they became inexpensive methods to ship cargo, stuff from Minnesota to the Midwest of America. There are a lot from then for generations of ships that were going to and from. A lot of them got wrecked. They just sort of disappear in the shallow water pretty quickly. They because it's shallow water, it deteriorates really fast. So people can just disappear without a trace sometimes. So it's really spooky, and there have been a lot of movies made about some of these shipwrecks as well. This guy, Chris Gilchrist, he's the director of the museum, and he, along with a bunch of other divers, they were trying to salvage and study all these. And this guy is a hero, man. He's really trying to recover some lost history of America. And a lot of people, like I said earlier, a lot of people underestimate shipwrecks and what information they glean. Now, again, a lot of shipwrecks aren't really that old, although I did do an episode about one in the South China Sea. They found a really old shipwreck, and they're awesome. There's usually gold and stuff, especially in the ocean. But here, this kind of gives us a snapshot into our history right before there was wide scale cameras and photographs and video and like crude video and stuff like that. So these are the closest things we can get, aside from journals and family heirlooms, that we can really see what was going on in the early 1800s and what the people there were up to, especially the entrepreneurs, because you couldn't really have a boat unless you were pretty well off back then, like a commercial boat. I mean anybody can have a smaller boat. So the organization was founded and run by a board that included presidents and executives of shipping companies, and they didn't like talking about shipwrecks. So Gilchrist is talking about why a lot of these shipwrecks weren't found, or people didn't really try looking for them. It was discouraged. So yeah, they didn't want people talking about their shipwrecks. It was bad for business. They didn't want people knowing that they're shipwrecked on a regular basis. The board was run by really high rollers, high-ranking people, executives and presidents and whatnot. So they were just left there to rot for a long time, until this Gilchrist guy. So he convinced the board of his vision, and he wanted the A-OK, and then they gave him the OK, and then the museum hired this group, CLUE, Cleveland Underwater Explorers. So this is that private group I was talking about earlier, who basically specialize in finding stuff and bringing it up to the surface. And these are probably high-level divers, and diving is not as easy as it looks, man. It's really dangerous. A lot can go wrong, especially deep-sea diving. But these guys are experts, so if you want to find something, these are the guys that hire. So the museum hired these people, and then they immediately found dozens of shipwrecks in Lake Erie, and then some more in Lake Ontario. So they weren't messing around. They were going. And then Soden, who's one of the people of CLUE, there's a missing history under the lakes. You increase the history that's known by examining what's out there, and the museum made the commitment to understand history through those submerged sites. So after some nudging, the museum finally is on board. And here's a little background of the CLUE's membership. So they all have degrees in engineering, which basically informs the precision of the research. And then they do a lot of research before they even jump in the water, just so they know exactly what they're looking for. They go through a lot. They go through news accounts of the times. They go through the government archives. They check the registry of all the commercial vessels. And then once they create that target list, they get the good location data from there, and then they narrow down exactly where they should search. So they're not just like willy-nilly going down and looking day to day. I mean, they really get their facts straight first, and they don't want to waste any movement, and they don't want to waste any time looking where it probably won't be. What they do is they look for a wreck within a 25-mile radius, because he knows it takes about an hour or 2 hours to check just 1 square mile using sonar. So he's basically 25 square mile, that's 25 to 50 hours of work right there. He ranks all the records of the boats that have been lost by how good the information is. So if he has really good information on one, he'll put it at the top of the list and it gets priority. And then the ones where they don't have as much information, they go to the bottom. Interestingly enough, though, this is how they found the Lake Serpent. It was on a whim. The Lake Serpent was actually really on the low end of the list, if it was even on the list at all, just because it was so old and the records for it were pretty... there probably were some records, but not many. I mean, all they knew was those two brothers died and that they were running a limestone quarrying business. That was it. So 3 years ago, in 2015, on one of their scan near Kelly's Island, which is again right here, they saw something like some sort of shape, and they thought it was a rock. And I showed you that picture earlier. I mean, that looks like a rock. It was a small rock. So Kowalks, he notes it, but he's like, the guy can't be a shipwreck. There's no way. And then later, they just dove and checked it. Whatever, this is check. And then they found out it was a wooden schooner buried under decades of sediment. And then because it was buried under all those levels of sediment, he's like, okay, this is probably pretty old. Because it's really old, immediately they're just gonna go and check. They didn't, because of weather, they weren't able to get in there right away. But they knew it was the Lake Serpent because of the elaborate carving of the snake on the front of the ship. Then they dig up this newspaper article from 1829 from the Cleveland Weekly Herald. So it says that boat in question was carrying a load of stone from Kelly's Island, and then it sunk. Here's a really interesting part. This happened in 1829, the sinking of the ship. Had the stones been obtained any year after 1830, when the official quarries opened in 1830, the ship's cargo would have been smoother blocks. So it would have been, there's like a rhyme and reason to how they quarry the blocks after it became part of a sanctioned part of the government. Before then, these were just privateers basically going in and mining these crude blocks and loading as much as they could on their schooner. But on this shipwreck, there are boulders because, this is before 1830. So because they saw these boulders, they're like, okay, this is really old. So right away, this group, they found something that they were completely off guard. They did not know how old it was. The museum, they claim with about 75% certainty that this is the Lake Serpent. I don't know why they don't think 25% chance that it's not. I mean, there's that elaborate snake carving on the bow of the ship. Just to put in perspective how they're working, for every 2 days you spend in the field, you spend about a month working on the data. So that should tell you how long these guys are working on one particular find, which could potentially be the Lake Serpent. They found a bunch of other stuff too. They found the Margaret Olwell, a 554-foot barge carrying, again, limestone from Kelly's Island. And then it got capsized in 1899. The Great Lakes have more shipwrecks per square mile than anywhere else, with more than 2,000 in Lake Erie alone. And like I said earlier, the shallow waters makes it easier for shipwrecks to be spotted, but it makes it more dangerous, and it makes them in a lot worse condition when they find them because they rot faster, basically. There are shipwrecks found off Kelly's Island in 15 feet of water, and they're pancakes, according to Gilchrist. In 1897 in Lake Superior, they found the Antelope, which was astonishingly intact. In 2016, they found it under 300 feet of water. And then the oldest shipwreck in the Great Lakes is Le Griffin, which was the first European-style ship built by explorer Robert de La Salle that is believed to have sank in Lake Michigan in a storm in 1679. Wow. Oh no, they didn't find it, but there's a historical documentation of it sinking, but they haven't found it yet. It's probably dust now, I would have to assume, if they haven't found it yet. But who knows? So here's why it makes it difficult to find, is contradictory witness reports, the difficulty of separating myth from fact, combined with the accumulation of silt of more than 100 years. So it makes, if you guys have ever been underwater, and then if you kick up some dirt from the bottom of the lake, you can't see anything. Even if it's a little bit of dirt, you can't see anything. So if you're trying to find something that is buried under all that dirt, there's no way. Because even if you try to, with the fine-tooth comb, go on the lake bottom, you're gonna kick up, the slightest move is gonna kick up a bunch of dirt, and you're gonna be blind, and you're not gonna be able to see it, and then you're gonna have to wait for it to settle, but then it's gonna settle on top of what you're looking for again. So it's really difficult to do without some sort of sonar or something, some sort of radar system that could detect an old shipwreck that's likely over hundreds of years old, at least over 100 years old, maybe 200 years old, like the Lake Serpent. So here's what they're trying to do now. They want to do more dives on the Lake Serpent site, but because of Ohio law, they can't bring anything up to display. So what they're going to do is they're going to spread awareness. They're going to have lectures so they can get some financial support for the project. And they're going to have these lectures at the Lakewood Historical Society, the Sandusky Maritime Museum, and the Toledo Shipmasters Association. Interesting. The Great Lakes, it was a huge part of history, even in the 1600s. I mean, they were sailing boats back then. Just imagine if you were a Western person and you took a boat across the Atlantic in like the 1500s, 1600s, and then you come across these giant lakes like Lake Erie. I mean, if you're in the middle of Lake Erie, it's really hard to see the shore with dead reckoning. I mean, it looks like an ocean, like something like the Dead Sea or something like that. So if you're someone like that, I mean, you must have gone back to your country and talked about it for sure. These giant lakes in the middle of the continent. And then not only that, it's rich in stuff like limestone. I mean, limestone is super valuable to any civilization, along with gold. And then before them, Lake Erie was part of the Iroquois, and that whole nation of Indians, Native Americans, like the Mohawks. There are 5 nations. I forget. They're the Mohawks, the Seneca, and there are a couple others that I can't remember. But they were all based around these huge lakes. So I bet there's a lot of stuff here. Not just the shipwrecks, although the shipwrecks provide a lot of information, especially with Western government, Western society, and American and Canadian history, as well as British and French, and probably some Spanish history as well. But I mean, there's probably arrowheads and probably some. Yesterday I did a video about this fort that they found, this Native American fort dated to the 1600s in modern day Connecticut. So I mean, there must be a bunch of stuff here that they just haven't found. And I talked about this yesterday. There's not many people looking for these artifacts either. So I mean, there's groups like Clue, but they specialize in diving in the Great Lakes. So let me know what you guys think. I still haven't had any comments about looking in your backyard. Have you ever heard? Have you or anyone you know found arrowhead or anything like that? Let me know if you guys are interested in that kind of stuff. I love hearing those stories, and then I'll see you guys tomorrow.